Hi, this is Andrea Vicari and you're listening to jazzlondonradio.com and this is Jazz Doodles. My guest today is Duncan Eagles and here's what The Guardian had to say about him. Saxophonist Duncan Eagles holds the stage with his attractively dry tone, sharpness and the urgent ferocity of his tenor improvising. That was John Fordham, writing for The Guardian. Duncan regularly performs with his own group Particle and has recently recorded an album, String Theory, on the Whirlwind label. As well as bandleader and composer, Duncan is in demand as a sideman with artists such as Yannick Guizdala, Gary Husband and Bennett McLean. Welcome to the show, Duncan.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Okay, so, Particle, String Theory. Have you always had an interest in quantum physics?
Physics wasn't definitely not my strong point at school, no, so yeah.
So just, I mean, I know why the string theory is, because you've got strings in it, and obviously,
yeah,
but
sure,
where did...
I think, to be honest, it just, I think we were just at the pub, had a few too many beers and thought...
Right.
Yeah.
Particle would be a good name. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I saw Particle. I've seen Particle quite a few times, actually. I've seen them with strings. I've seen them without strings. Mm-hmm. And without the strings, the harmony is far more implied. It's more subtle. Mm-hmm. It's not so direct. But when you put the strings in, this for me added the harmony. And obviously, being a piano player, I kind of liked that. But it wasn't there when you didn't have the strings. And I just wondered, you know, was that one of the ideas why you added strings? I mean, why did you record an album with Particle and strings?
This is obviously our third album, so the past two albums have been very much just an acoustic trio, and so it was just really, for a third album, I just kind of wanted to think of something that would really push myself, you know, as well, and rather than just kind of going down the same route as developing some material, going to studio and recording it, what options we had, you know. And I guess the obvious thing would be to add a harmony instrument, but we still wanted to kind of keep the dynamic within the trio and without a kind of steady comping instrument. So the stuff I was checking out at that time, I remember it was the latest Wayne Shorter album where he augments his band with a wind quartet, and so the way that he was using that, I kind of was really drawn to that. So I was thinking, you know, about maybe going down that route, you know, and I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, it was, you know, I think you've done it really is a really, really interesting album, and I think we talked about it previously, but you know, you were quite keen, weren't you, to, when you were writing for strings, not just to write a unison line. I mean, what sort of things were you doing in preparation for this album in terms of understanding how to write for strings?
Yeah, well, it was quite exciting, really, because I hadn't really worked with string musicians or written anything with it, you know, arranged anything for strings before. So yeah, it was kind of just did a lot of listening and kind of researching into the rules, you know. So I was kind of like not wanting to just use the string quartet as a pad. Or,
that's what I was. Yeah,
exactly. So it was kind of, you know, writing the arrangements to making sure there was enough space to kind of interact with them in a kind of improvised setting, you know. So
in the first one on the album, do you remember what it's called?
Clash of the Clans.
That one. Yeah. The first thing that I noticed about it is there's this crazy kind of, it's a bit like Ligeti, kind of like this crazy string thing, and then out of that comes, you know, some more organised music. But I love it. For a second, it's quite an unusual texture, you know. And I mean, I presume that was kind of the idea of the effect behind it. But
totally,
It really draws the listener in, because you're like, wow. First track on the CD. Wow, this sounds totally crazy.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think with those, especially with the first three tracks on the album, it was kind of more, rather than creating a piece which was kind of like a melody with a solo, I was kind of just trying to create just an atmosphere or a mood, you know. So that first track was kind of sort of like a battle type feeling. So trying to make seeing what noises we could get out of them in quite an aggressive way to contrast the third track, which is a lot smoother.
Well, let's have a listen to that track.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
Be a good point to play it now. Clash of the Clans from Duncan Eagles' CD, String Theory, and welcome back, Duncan. So we're talking about this String Theory album and some of the concepts behind it, and the violinist on the recording is Bennett McLean. He's more known for his jazz playing and singing skills. So how did you discover his string abilities?
Right, yeah. Well, it was kind of by accident, really, because I've known him for quite a long time, and I've been playing in his group where he kind of leads the band from the piano and vocals. So I've been playing in that for a couple of years. And really, what happened? I did speak to him about when I was kind of having the idea of doing this album with the strings. I kind of mentioned it to him. We chatted about it, and he never mentioned anything. And then it got to a week before our first recording session, and one of the violinists had to pull out. And we'd spent quite a lot of time rehearsing and things. So I remembered that he had a residency with a violinist. So I rang him up and explained what happened to get some numbers. And then that's when he revealed that he played the violin, and he'd come and do it. And so I kind of thought he was joking, so I didn't believe him. But he was free to do like the final rehearsal, and he just turned up and totally nailed it. And then basically ended up doing the first session, which kind of took a bit of a turn for the worst. And then he ended up rebooking the string quartet that is now on this album. And yeah, incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah.
I mean, he improvises on violin, which is not an easy feat in a sort of jazz style, but he also, I mean, comes across to me as an extremely talented violinist, really good technique, beautiful sound, and he's featured quite prominently, isn't he, on the album, which is
Well, I mean, on kind of when I kind of found out and heard the ability he had on the instrument, the time that we had between the original session and the session that made it to the album, I kind of thought about how he kind of needed to be featured a lot more, because as you say, it's just quite incredible. He seems to be able to just transfer the knowledge he has on the piano directly to the violin with no real sort of barriers or anything.
Wow.
But I think it was his first instrument. I think he studied originally as a classical violinist.
Yeah, I did look up a little bit about him and realised that he had studied it. But obviously, if you work professionally with someone and they you're working them as a jazz pianist and vocalist, you're not going to know that they play a violin unless they actually say it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so let's have a listen to Bennett McLean on one of the tracks from String Theory. That was Bennett McLean playing The River on the album by Particle called String Theory. So, Duncan, you studied at Trinity Laban Conservatoire some years ago, and now you're an educator, running weekly workshops at the Hideaway Jazz Club in Streatham on Monday evenings, and also you're a tutor on the Dordogne Jazz Summer School on the second week. So I just wanted to chat to you a little bit about how, do you value jazz education? You obviously are a product of a conservatoire, and you're now imparting your information to others. So is it something you feel strongly about, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of education for jazz in this country, which is definitely a good thing. so yeah, I mean, as far as the kind of education I guess I do is kind of more of in a sort of jam setting. So what we're doing at the Hideaway is kind of like a workshop thing, really. So it's like very practical, just kind of like talking about a few concepts and trying things out with a band, a very practical thing. But the conservatoire thing, I think is so great, because it's such a great opportunity for you to be given the knowledge, the theory, like harmony, all that kind of thing, but then also getting time with musicians that are based in London, that are kind of writing their own music, developing their own thing, and you kind of get put in a room with them and you can kind of pick their brains, which is not something that you would necessarily get by avoiding that route, going to watch gigs and things like that. You're not going to get the same level of attention that you do in a conservatoire. So that's a very valuable thing, I think, for developing, the younger generation of.
And presumably, it's an audition process to get in somewhere like, I don't know, Trinity Laban or the Royal Academy and stuff. So you're actually there with people that, are a similar level to you.
Yeah, sure.
So you're able to bring your playing up to a high level. I mean, interestingly. Last week I interviewed Jim Mullen, and he didn't talk about it, but I know that he basically learned on the job, and sure, that kind of older jazz musicians, you just got to play gigs, and which, is great, but things change, don't they? I mean, I think the opportunities then are different to the opportunities now.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, ideally that'd be great. I mean, to learn how to play jazz from just doing it is great, but you're right. I don't think that there's less gigs now, loads more musicians. I think it's harder to learn on the job, nowadays. So that's, I think, the conservatoire thing is become a lot more important. And also, as you say, you get to meet people of your age, of your similar abilities. I think when you're younger and developing, more, you kind of speak to your mates, and you check out what they're doing, and you kind of all develop together, and who you're hanging around with does have an impact on the musician you are. So you're being placed all together, which is definitely a good thing too. Yeah.
I mean, even going further back in time, pre-conservatoire education, you obviously at some point benefited from being taught jazz saxophone. Again, something that a generation or two before you, there weren't jazz teachers and stuff, and so. Did you feel that really helped your journey? Who was your sax teacher?
It was Mornington.
Mornington
Lockett was my
Lockett,
first proper sax teacher. Yeah.
And
totally. Those are amazing lessons. Just sorted me out completely. Basically, he's kind of like an encyclopedia of jazz knowledge. And kind of taught me the foundations and lots more.
I mean, prior to that, even going back another step. So were you just playing the saxophone, or had you always kind of got it in your head that you were going to play jazz?
Well, really, I started playing piano, really. So I started playing classical piano when I was about 8, and that was just because I kind of remember when I was really young, just being drawn to a piano, and could sit there for hours just playing it, like just hitting notes randomly for some reason. I really enjoyed that, so my parents kind of gave in and bought me a keyboard, and then just gave me some lessons. So I went through the classical grade system, and by the time I got to like GCSEs, I must have been about grade 6 standard, possibly classical music. But I always got put in to play piano at the school concerts and stuff, and I didn't really know anything other than playing classical music. But I always remember being very nervous about doing it. So when I kind of was put in to do A-level music, and the head of music at the school was a jazz musician, jazz sax player, and the board that I was doing, we needed 2 instruments. So he was basically just said, look, get a saxophone, and I'll teach you how to play it.
So it's quite by
randomly.
chance.
Yeah, totally. I never thought to do it, But then as soon as he lent me some CDs, and he kind of explained about what jazz was, and the freedom that came with that, I was just instantly drawn to it, because I remember just the thing that would make me so anxious from playing classical music was like, what if I made a mistake and didn't play what was on the written sheet, and I just get really nervous. Whereas with jazz, there are no mistakes really,
no wrong notes.
Yeah, exactly. So I was kind of really drawn to the freedom that came along with jazz, and then obviously then meeting Mornington, and then developing like that, getting into Trinity, just kind of one thing led to the other, and then that was that. Yeah.
I mean, it's quite interesting, this idea of why people are drawn to something like jazz, and I mean, it sounds very similar to my thoughts on classical music, which is the dread of the wrong note and the whole performance being based on what went wrong, whereas I tend to think with jazz it's about what went right that's more important, and the love of performing that comes of not having to worry about those sort of things. And even if there is a mistake, it's how you manipulate the mistake. Maybe out of a mistake something interesting will happen, you know. It's like that Thelonious Monk thing of playing a wrong note and then play it a few times. I'm sure he thought it was the right note, but you know, playing something very dissonant that perhaps someone would think was the wrong note, but just do it a few more times.
Yeah, sure.
And it sounds pretty hip, you know. So yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's interesting. So I just wondered, you know, you're a fairly young jazz musician. You've kind of paid your dues and stuff, and you're making a name on the scene. And I just wondered what you felt were the biggest challenges facing young jazz musicians at the moment. What do you feel? Maybe something that all musicians would face, or maybe something just being, you know, now, as in 2015, kind of.
I think not just for young jazz musicians, just being a jazz musician in London, I think is quite a tough thing to make a living out of.
Well, apparently you need 77,000 or something like that to buy your first property. It's in the news, so that's probably the majority of jazz musicians out. But that's
renting for life.
Renting for life. Yeah.
But I mean, I kind of think, you know, not taking, you know, if you're going to go through the music college thing, like not taking that for granted. You know, like a music college, you know, all your time is spent developing or like learning, you know, and practicing, and you've got a lot of time to practice what you want. You're surrounded by musicians, you can rehearse whenever you want, everyone's up for playing. As soon as you leave music college, and you know, you're 21, 22 when you get out of music college, you've got to pay your rent, you've got to do your teaching, you've got to do the functions. There's a million other things that get in the way to actually, you know, continue developing what you want to do or working on your own concepts. So I think that is a very difficult thing that I've kind of found. The older you get and the more responsibility you have, the harder it is to make time to, you know, write your music, you know, develop your tone, keep your technique together, you know, hustle your gigs, you know, because again, with the state of the, you know, funding for jazz, you know, more and more gigs are going, less and less funding, harder and harder to keep your original projects going, because, you know, to develop your band, you've got to be playing, and when the gigs are going and there's less and less money, it just gets more and more difficult. Yeah, I think it is tough, but at the same time, you know, London has an amazing scene, and there's lots of, you know, especially the younger guys in London setting up their own gigs, and, you know, it is very healthy and it's there, but, you know, it's not obviously easy to.
That's that's something that, you know, I've noticed from when I was a young student, and in the first few years of my career, I noticed that now a lot of young people will form together in groups, and you've got the Chaos Collective, and you've got, you know, lots of groups of people who will put on improvised nights. Like we had Dee Byrne was doing an interview recently, and she does Loom, you know. That's right. And it's kind of like, you know, people having the energy to set these things up,
and they're usually very successful. Like George Crowley, Consuelo Bar, and the Oxford has been going for a long time, and it's good. So it's
I mean, it's very encouraging, and obviously as these musicians get older and older, maybe there'll be a generation of other people coming through, and the whole scene becoming more and more vibrant, you know. Exciting times.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Exciting times. Well, thank you very much, Duncan. It's been lovely having you on the show, and hope it all goes well, and the album launch. Thank you.